This is my review of the Super-Takumar 28mm f3.5 on an M42 mount. I tested this lens on a Sony a6400, and I have to apologize if you can hear the background sound. This is the quietest location I could find at the moment. My goal when renting this lens was to find a wide-angle lens that I could use for architectural photography and some landscapes when I go traveling, and something that's a little bit easier for my wife to use. Previously, my daily driver was the SMC Takumar 50-1.4, and on a crop sensor that's a little bit tight, especially because my wife's not super into photography, so we can't just take pictures while we're sitting at a restaurant, that kind of thing. I'm going to try to separate my pros and cons between what I like about the lens and its optics itself, and my opinion on the aperture and focal range, which aren't necessarily dependent on this lens. First, let's start with the pros. Its build quality is phenomenal. I had it just sitting on my desk while I was getting some work done. It's very satisfying to have in the hand. It's built like a tank, and the focus ring is one of the best I've felt on a vintage lens, although it's a little far of a throw for how wide the plane of focus is. The next pro is it's quite sharp. I wouldn't say it's very sharp, but for such an old lens, it's quite sharp. In this first photo, I was shooting with a helicoid adapter, which lets me greatly reduce the minimum focus distance to about 4 inches. I don't know what that is in centimeters, but I'll put that here. In this first picture, you can see that in the plane of focus, things are very sharp. Here's another good example. It's sharp enough for architecture photography. But you can see even in the corners, it's sharp enough. I have to shoot at a slower shutter speed because it's a 3.5, and especially when I'm doing architectural photography, as you can see on a overcast, rainy day, I would like a faster aperture. But for a $40 lens, we have to keep that in context. Very reasonable. It's a very fun lens too. Let me move over to, I'm going to go back to these pictures, but here's another example. You can see its sharpness is okay. One thing I really do like about this lens is you get a very painterly effect with the bokeh. It's a lot softer than the 50-1.4 that I've been using, which is not necessarily a pro, not necessarily a con. The bokeh is very soft. I would say it's even creamy. I know that doesn't really actually mean anything, but you can get these painterly effects. I believe this is due to the micro contrast, but I'm not super professional. But yeah, the way it rendered this bokeh for me is very satisfying. Let's move back. This is the style of photography that I'm looking for a lens for, and it checks all the boxes. It definitely checks all the boxes. Let's zoom in. You can see I have quite a bit of sharpness. This is stop down. Even in the corners, we have quite a bit of sharpness. Let me open the original. Obviously, a lot of contrast, saturation, great saturation, what you expect from Takumars. I love Takumar lenses, which is why I wanted to get this one. But I think I'm going to try the 35 next, but we'll get into that later. So I'm going to turn my processing back on just so we could see a final result. Yeah. If I bought this lens, I wouldn't be sad. I wouldn't be dissatisfied. Because I'm renting it, and I have the ability to rent out other lenses and try it, I don't think this is the one I'm going to end up keeping. But if I bought it and I was stuck with this for the project I'm working on, I would be completely happy with the results. It pairs really, really well with the 51.4. They complement each other, where one is weak, the other is strong, and vice versa. All right, here is another good example of how smooth this bokeh is. My wife and I went out to get Vietnamese barbecue last night, and it's pretty flat. Not very busy. It's very pleasing bokeh. I really do like the bokeh quality on this lens. But the way it renders the foreground, again, we're not super sharp here. The colors are very saturated. There's great contrast, but again, it just looks a little flat. It looks like, one thing I love about Takumar lenses are the painterly effect that you can get from them. It's not only Takumars that do them, but I think this lens brings it a little too far, if I had to be completely honest. I went to a pagoda today, and I only have this lens for a couple days, and I have to return it today. So this is the style of photography that I'm looking for. If you're thinking about picking up this lens, I do highly recommend it. I'm not saying it's a bad lens, and for the price, it's a 10 out of 10. For $40, $50, for $50 I could pick this up, and there's no scratches. The glass is pristine. These are the style of photography that I want this lens for, and it really checks all the boxes, as I said before. You can see that there is a little bit of distortion. This is a 28 lens on a crop sensor, so I'm around 50 millimeters. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but you're getting distortion of a 28 millimeter lens. If you're on a full frame, you're going to have that distortion, but it's going to be a little bit more understandable. But for this focal length on this crop sensor, I don't really have that wide of a field of view, and the amount of distortion I'm getting, you can see it a little bit here on the sides. These bricks are perfectly straight. Okay, let's move on to a video test. I don't really do too much video, especially with such a wide angle lens. So I'm currently recording this video on the lens. You can see the background, the bokeh behind me. This is a reflection, so this should be the farthest thing away, so you could see how out of focus it gets. And so here's my video test that I did. Okay, overall, I would recommend this lens. I was being very critical on it, mostly because have I been out of focus this whole time? If I've been out of focus this whole time, my apologies. I'm not going to record that again. Problems of shooting manual primes for video. So yeah, overall, I do recommend this lens. I was very hard on it. It satisfies what I want, but I'd say it just passes the threshold of what I'm looking for an architectural lens. For just a daily driver in street photography, the focal range gives you a lot of context. It is a slow aperture, so you're not going to get background separation. Now, I wouldn't really call this an art lens, which is one of the main reasons people get into vintage lenses, but it's a lot of fun. I can't recommend this as your daily driver because it's very limited in its usage. I would go for something with a faster aperture. The focal range for a daily driver is okay, but this fills in the gaps if your only other lens is a portrait lens or a fast 50. Overall, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. As this is my first lens review, that means absolutely nothing, but I'm planning on doing quite a bit more of these. I have access to a huge collection of lenses that I can rent out for very cheap. So as I continue looking for a good architectural photography lens and maybe something in the telephoto range, just to fill out my focal range spectrum, I'll be posting these videos as I go through the lenses. If this is the first video you saw and you made it to the end, beautiful, thank you. My name is Alan. I'm a sound engineer and photographer based in Hanoi, Vietnam. I'm putting out 2 or 3 videos a week at the moment, and I'm working towards a long-form series on the architectural history of North Vietnam, specifically Hanoi. But for the ancient stuff, I'm going to have to go outside of Hanoi. Vote in your local elections, and I hope you have a great day.